Welcome to another week of Quarantine Catch Up. I'm your host, Tommy Rinaldi. As always, I'm joined by Chris Famulero. And this week's guest is Seton Hall's media renaissance man and overall good friend, good man, Wilnir Louis. How you doing today, bud?
I'm good. I love how you call me media renaissance. Like I'm just a regular person that's involved at Seton Hall, but it's great to be here and it's great to catch up with the two of you.
You are a renaissance man. You do everything, Wilnir. Don't be humble.
I mean, I do it because I enjoy it, but I don't like consider myself that. I just consider myself somebody that's trying to get involved with as much as I can with the time that I have.
Well, that's great. I mean, you should be taking advantage of the time that you have at Seton Hall. We'll get into more of that. But first, let's talk about what you've been doing over quarantine. We've been in here for about 3 months. I want to know what you've been watching, what you've been listening to.
I'll be honest. Honestly, I probably could have did a little bit more during quarantine in terms of like actual entertainment stuff because I think I'll finished and I'm completely blanking on the show right now. And All American. That was the one show that like I finished like when quarantine started, but then after that, I just kind of like chilled back on like Netflix because it takes a lot for me to really start a Netflix series because I know like once I start a Netflix series, like I am not going to be productive whatsoever. So I decided to kind of shy away from that a little bit more. And a majority of my time has been doing stuff for WSOU as of recently. And I also been trying to work out a little bit more too. Me and my brother went half and half on a basketball hoop from my backyard. So I've been getting my shots up back there. I'm doing
Awesome.
a couple of like core workouts inside. But yeah, I'll say a lot of my time has been WSOU, but just trying to also be productive in terms of like working out, getting my body right, and just like learning a couple new things.
That's really good. I mean, this is really the time to focus on yourself. And it's nice to hear that you've been working out and you're working out with your brother, which is even better. You have someone to do that with. And you say you've been doing stuff with WSOU. Previous to everything with quarantine, you were WSOU station manager, and now you've stepped into the role of sports director. What has that transition been like? Because I know that must have been weird going through everything, trying to manage everything with quarantine happening, and now you're into this new role. I just want to hear some of your thoughts on what that's been like.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also interesting too because I think in recent memory, I'm probably like the only manager that did that from like a station manager role to now kind of go into a regular management role because like you said, being a station manager, you're kind of micromanaging everything and you're like taking care of not even almost everybody on staff. Whereas now as a sports director, it's only, really focusing on the 30 or so people that's on the sports staff. So, I mean, it wasn't that much of an adjustment for me because I had full trust in Michael Daly to really benefit the station and really continue to grow the station to what I was trying to do as a station manager. And as of recent, he's been doing a great job at that. So it wasn't really that much of a transition. And in the same token, I think sports was probably one of the biggest things that did get hurt during this whole quarantine. So from going to now you have to manage the station and trying to do the station remotely, making sure that everybody's fine and all of that, to now you have to figure out sports during this whole thing. And, only as of this month, sports has been starting to come back and starting to return. So trying to figure out what we could do for those like 2.5 months when I did get elected and then get officially into the position, trying to figure out what we could do for those 2.5 months with no sports to really broadcast and really report on was a little bit difficult, but credit to all of my assistants to help us get some ideas to really allow us to continue to keep our department afloat and honestly even blossom our department over these past couple of months.
I mean,
If
when
you
I
look,
was on
yeah,
staff, oh, sorry, Tommy. When I was on staff with WSU, I primarily did a lot of sports stuff. And like we did pretty much only Seton Hall sports news relatively, and then some college sports news relative to the Big East and stuff like that. But now, since I've seen what you have taken over and WSU's Twitter has just completely exploded in its capability and its coverage. And, you know, I give a lot of credit to you guys and your assistants. I mean, you guys have fully enveloped all aspects of media. I mean, you guys are doing YouTube videos, you're doing graphics, you have Danny who's doing incredible photoshops and really great graphics. You guys are doing player previews. I mean, I give you guys a lot of credit. You have completely just exploded into this all-encompassing media outlet that I think WSOU is really deserving of when it comes to sports, because you guys we were already putting out good radio broadcasts, so now you guys are just covering, you know, you're covering the written side, you're covering the visual aspect. I think it's really just coming out to be an overall really, really good process.
Yeah, and that was a main thing that I really wanted to do during my term, because you look at, you know, Matt Ambrose, which y'all had on it, and you look at Dalton. I think the two things that they were able to do really good was to really improve the broadcasting stuff. But like you said, over the past couple of years, the social media side of things wasn't really as massive. Especially with, you know, before those two terms, when you had no, I'm just gonna say, when you had like Kevin on, and he was kind of like cut and dry in terms of what he wanted on social media, and then you go to Matt Ambrose, who was starting to be a little bit more lenient. Then you go to Dalton, who had Majinski as an assistant to do the graphics. So for me, it was trying to continue to do what they were doing on top of the radio stuff and top of the broadcasting stuff. But of course, with the whole coronavirus, there isn't really that much broadcast for us to do. So I also wanted to try to revamp the social media and revamp the YouTube and stuff like that. And, you know, that was the main reason why I took Danny in as an assistant, because I knew personally, even before he joined staff, what he was able to do in terms of graphics and stuff like that. And he has honestly benefited me and made me improve on how I wanted to do graphics. So a couple of the graphics that went on the sports Twitter and on the sports Instagram, you know, those were the ones that I did, because he kind of inspired me to really up my Photoshop game and really do really benefit and really hone in my crafts and stuff like that. And in terms of the Pirate Player previews, credit to Heaven Hill for that one, because it was just a random idea that he had. He did, I think, a preview on Miles Kale, and then just randomly came up with the idea like, hey, why don't we do it for everybody on the team? And, you know, that's really been our bread and butter over the past month in terms of our content. And it's going to be still our content for the next month, because now we're on the women's side of things. But we're also focusing on, now with New Jersey having their baseball tournament, now we're able to get back into at least a little bit of broadcasting. But again, over the past couple of months has been just focusing on what we could do on the social media side to continue to get engagements and increase our engagements. And then hopefully, if there is a basketball season, or whatever a basketball season is going to look like, you know, when November, December comes around, all the stuff that we've did now to help us benefit down the line.
You've been able to develop this social media. You've been able to develop a nice tight-knit family and good crew for WSOU Sports. And you're saying you're learning all along the way. I mean, being a station manager, being sports director, you learn things here and there by going to conferences and going out. You've gotten awards doing things. WSOU has gotten its own awards. What's it like being in this prestigious group of people from a lineage far before us and hopefully going into the future? What's it like to be part of WSOU?
I mean, it's definitely amazing, because I don't know how many times I told this story, but when I was a freshman joining the class and I realized that WSU was just a metal station, I kind of almost shied away from it and just said, like, I don't want to do this, because I wasn't really interested in metal at the time. But I was able to kind of stick with it, and, you know, credit to the people who really allowed me to continue to blossom. But just the best thing about WSU is you get almost double, if not triple, what you put into what you're able to get out of it. You know, as a freshman, I would have never thought that, you know, I would have went to like the Bahamas to call a women's basketball game, went across the country to go to a conference, you know, got a lot of those awards or anything like that. But WSOU has been able, has allowed me to kind of really, again, hone in my crafts in terms of what I want. And the fact that it's kind of hands off, because you have, you know, professional radio stations where you have to go through like a whole lineage of people if you want to do something. Like, let's say if I wanted to like post a graphic on like a professional radio station side, you know, you would have to go through like the graphic designer, then you have to go through the social media director, then you have to go through like the general manager and stuff like that. But, you know, Mr. Maven has entrusted all of us on staff to really make our best judgments, and trusted us that we will make our best judgments in terms of when we post content or when we do different things like that. And, you know, that's really allowed me to grow, and allowed me to show these skills that hopefully translates into the professional field. And, you know, also there's such a great alumni base with WSOU. I do believe that everything that I've done here is going to help translate into a professional field. And when I do graduate, that I'll be able to find, you know, at least a good entry job and be on the radar of a couple of high class people where I don't, where it'll be like, I'm trying to figure out the right words for this. But to be able to find a good job because of all of the hard work that I've put in to WSOU.
And
I
that
mean,
hard,
it was, especially when I had graduated, it was a year ago at this point, but I was on WSOU staff for 2 years. And I mean, I didn't even get the full 4, but, you know, having SOU on my resume, having the opportunities, you know, going to call games at Madison Square Garden, Prudential Center, taking trips out, you know, to Nebraska to call games, and being parts of just the learning experience, you know. And it's not even all on air stuff. It's the fact that we, as part of the sports staff, and you yourself, Wilnir, you're also a DJ, so you get experience with the regular music technology as well. But you get so much engineering experience. You know, there's problem solving, there's rerouting, there's, you know, teamwork and team building when it comes to making a broadcast work. Whether it's technology, production, the actual broadcast, the post production, all of it, it's all important. So having WSOU, it's a well-known station in this area. You know, people, when you say you worked at WSOU at 89.5, like, they know what you're talking about. And then they ask you, what did you do? And for the fact that you've been station manager, now sports director, you were assistant sports director. I mean, you have great on-air calls. You've got all of it going together. So even just having that on your resume and then being able to explain all that you've done, I mean, it all comes together. I mean, I work at a television station and they still know what WSOU is.
Exactly. And that's just credit to, you know, everybody even before us who really made WSOU what it was and made it to as a college radio station with still kind of a professional background to it. Again, we all still have fun at the radio station. We're all still college students. But we know once it's time to get down to the nitty gritty and, you know, put stuff out on the air or, you know, put stuff on social media, that we have to do that in a professional standpoint, because, you know, again, everybody before us kind of was able to really bring the station to that standing. You know, Bob Lee, Bob Picozzi, you know, those people, you look at the careers that they've had, and when they talk about, you know, what made their careers great, they're going to say WSU. And that's just adds to what we have to do, because we can't let their legacies at WSU just falter off. So we have to still have that chip on our shoulder when we do promote stuff and when we do have stuff over the air.
with you stepping into this new role, where do you want to see everything go into the future? I know with this next semester coming up, it's a weird semester because of everything going on with coronavirus, and you guys are going to be there all the way straight through. There's no breaks in between anything. Do you guys have any future plans for what's going on with WSOU Sports? I know you've been going with social media and really building that platform, but what else do you see going into the future?
I definitely, if possible, because like you said, there's still a huge question mark in terms of how we're going to be able to broadcast. There has been, reports that I've saw over the past couple of months where you had broadcasters that's probably going to have to broadcast from their own studios instead of being at the arena or stuff like that. So we're still trying to figure out that. But in terms of in the future, I really want to, I'll just say reinforce our broadcast, because there has been a couple of times that I've seen, where broadcast just might not be as professional, and times where, people are kind of like going on tangents, or there could be like these little tweaks here and there that could just make it sound a little bit more better, make it sound like, if ESPN was broadcasting a game or if WFAN was broadcasting a game. So just being able to do that and be able to make people comfortable to broadcast the game, once they first get the opportunity, because, there's a lot of people that it takes them a couple of games to really get their footing in broadcasting. And of course, that's just natural because you're going to need that experience to broadcast a game. But I want to make it to where people feel comfortable broadcasting a game, and you don't really know that that might be their first game or their second game or anything like that, and give people the tools and the guidelines that I've learned over the past couple of years broadcasting the games that they'll be able to use. Whether it's going into a break or going out of a break, saying the time and score of a possession multiple times over, just saying the location a little bit more precisely, like little stuff like that you really don't know when you call the game again initially, but then you start learning down the line, down the season and stuff like that. I want to be able to just kind of be able to teach the younger staff members that just how to broadcast a little bit better. And then even for the more seasoned staff members, just getting those little tips to make us sound a little bit more professional. Like even at the end of a broadcast, how to say like your goodbyes or congratulations to like everybody at the end of the broadcast. Just like little stuff like that I've realized that, we don't do at WSOU, but you look at other more professional radio stations and they start doing that. So just trying to get us geared a little bit more to a professional sounding broadcast.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there about making things more professional and stepping up as a leader to make sure the future is in good hands and they're learning the right way and everything along those lines. And that's something me and Chris really had to do, taking over Hall Talk for PTV, trying to make it more professional, trying to make it more conversational, trying to make it as comfortable for anyone who goes on as possible. And you've stepped into a role in Pirate TV. Like we said, you're a media renaissance man at Seton Hall. I had the pleasure of still being sports director at PTV and putting you onto Hall Talk and scheduling you for that. It's been really nice to see you develop not just in WSOU, but develop in both PTV and Pirate Sports Network. What's been your experience with PTV and Pirate Sports Network, and what have you learned that's different from WSOU?
Well, of course, with those two platforms, those are a little bit more video side, or the video side of things. So, whereas like on WSOU, everything storytelling is basically what you're saying, in terms of, you might have to repeat your name or something like that, just like little things like that in the radio. But on, PTV and PSN, everything's on video. So you could be a little bit more, you could have a little bit more of a personality on it, because now people are seeing your faces and now people are like seeing the stuff that you wear, and things like that. So I've learned, off the top of my head, just being able to have a little bit more of that personality when you're on camera, because, the one thing that I do remember, and this is more towards PSN, was when we did our soccer preview video for men's and women's soccer. Like Tom Chen kept telling me, he was like, "Oh, why do you look so angry on camera?" And I'm like, "I'm not looking angry. That's just like my natural face." So I try to make it a little bit, a goal just to look happier on camera, and just like maybe have like a slight grin or something like that, just to be a little bit more personable. On PTV, I've learned, like the different camera stuff and, getting cued onto the cameras. And that's something that I didn't know. Because I didn't really have a TV background before going into PSN, or a video background going to PSN, or a PTV, excuse me. I did take like one TV class in high school, but that was just more like us recording and then editing stuff. It wasn't us really being on camera. So, just learning a lot of the little things for right now on PTV, and then just having like a rundown, knowing like the different cues and stuff like that. And hopefully, depending on what happens with either this semester or the spring semester, I can hope to learn a little bit more about the TV side of things and more about the production side of things, and just being able to hone in my craft on that side of everything. Because I feel like on the radio side, I'm not going to say I know everything, but I feel like I'm more knowledgeable on the stuff on the radio side, but I still want to be able to learn more stuff on the video side, whether it's video editing or just being live on video and stuff like that.
One of the things, I mean, that you touch on is the stuff that you've been doing for WSOU. You're learning different things for Pirate TV that could also transition into WSOU, like Photoshop and everything along those lines. I've really loved what you've done with the recruitment signings and everything like that. People in high school saying that they're committing to Seton Hall, and seeing your edits of that, also transfers coming over. What has been the new aspect of Photoshop that you're learning to love, learning to do everything with?
I think like you touched on with the recruits coming in and stuff like that, or the transfers, and being able to kind of do the jersey swaps for that. That's something that I've really I have a love and hate relationship with that, because it's very tedious to do those jersey swaps, and that's something that you really don't think is that tedious. You think, oh, it's just copy and pasting a couple of things and calling it a day, but you have to make sure that you adjust it properly. So, and depending on the angle of the player, you would have to adjust the lettering or the numbering accordingly. Of course, I still need a lot of improvement with that in terms of figuring out how do I do if there's like a little wrinkle in a jersey here or something like that. But as of recently, really being able to learn how to do those jersey swaps and just being able to at least make it look decent enough where it doesn't look like it's a jersey swap, where it looks like the person's actually wearing the jersey, has been really fun to do. But I still want to make it look a little bit better. So like, for example, like Cam Newton, when he signed with the Patriots and they had those jersey swaps coming around, just being able to make it look a little bit more professional, to when you zoom in, it doesn't look like, it was me copy and pasting or me doing it on Photoshop, that it actually looks like he was wearing a jersey.
For sure. And with your time at WSOU, PTV, PSN, you've been able to have a lot of media coverings through press, through interviews. You've been able to talk to Stephen A. Smith, Roger Goodell, a bunch of other people within this huge sports media space. Who has been some of the best interviews that you've either enjoyed or you just felt like you really killed that interview?
The Stephen A. Smith one, it was definitely interesting, seeing him in person. Because you see him on TV almost every day, or hear him on, the Stephen A. Smith radio show when it was on. But being able to kind of be face to face with him, and just look at somebody who, started from, basically nothing and is able to be one of the highest paid people at ESPN. Seeing him was definitely interesting. An interview that I just did recently for the Last Dance tournament with Frank DiLorenzo, who was actually a WSOU alum and now is the head baseball coach at Hackensack. I really felt like that interview was probably one of my better interviews, because I was able to transition everything and have everything flow together, because with him being a Seton Hall alum and him being a WSOU alum, and him being the Hackensack coach, you have those three different points that you want to talk about, but you have to find a way to kind of transition everything into like one smooth interview. And I felt like with that interview, I was really able to do that and transition everything from one topic to the next topic to the next topic. Of course, there's still a lot of improvements that I need to do with my interviewing skills. I've realized that there's a lot of filler words that I still use. I still say, on interviews a lot, and that irks me deeply, where it gets to a point where I realize when I do say it and then get frustrated with myself when I say it. There's a lot of times that I say and I've realized that I've been doing that during this whole thing. And there you go. And that's starting to frustrate me a little bit too.
It happens to all of us, don't you worry.
But I just want to try to get myself, in terms of getting my interview skills up and getting my talking skills up, just being able to minimize those filler words. Because if you're listening to somebody on the radio, if you're listening to somebody on an interview and you hear a lot of those filler words, like if you hear a lot of likes, or if you hear a lot of or if you hear a lot of it starts it starts watering down what the person's saying, and people start to tune out. And there's one professor that I had, I'm not going to say his name on this, but he does that a lot, where he would say, or he would say, a lot of those filler words, and then you tune out, because not only are you in a class, but he's also saying all those filler words. It's just like, will you stop? Like, what are you really trying to say here? So just being able to try to make myself a better speaker is something that I really want to do with my interviews. But in terms of my best interview, I think it would probably be that recent interview that I did with Frank DiLorenzo.
I think it's also interesting talking about, broadcasting and being people who study it, as well as, try and do it as a hobby. You come to realize quite quickly, for a good broadcast, you kind of have to alter your normal speech pattern or your normal cadence, or even your voice, like your delivery. Some people, like Matt Ambrose is one of the people I know who has a very good on-air voice, and that just naturally comes to him. But then there's other people who have to alter their voice when they go on air, and then that changes, like you said, it changes your thought process on what you're trying to say. And once you get better at it, you can hear yourself when you're speaking. You go, probably shouldn't have said like 3 times in that sentence. People are really losing it, and it's interesting becoming a person who enjoys doing broadcasting, how much you have to change your speaking pattern, your cadence, your normal words that you would say to a friend. You're not talking to a friend, you're potentially talking to thousands of people, and that can happen on WSOU. So it really, the people who are good at it naturally can pick it up, and then there's people who want to learn it, and you'll see the good ones adjust to it rather quickly. And Wilnir, you're obviously one who is good at it. You've continued doing it, and you can even see it now, the fact that it bothers you even while doing a podcast.
Yeah, because there was a lot of times where I would listen to my broadcast, even this past season, and earlier in the season I used to do this, but then when it came down later in the season, like, I started not doing it because I got a little bit more busier with schoolwork and stuff like that. But I had a guide, like a scoring sheet, like, okay, these are the words that I've probably said a lot. This is where I need to improve. These are the timestamps of certain broadcasts that I felt like was a great broadcast. These are timestamps where I felt like I could have improved a little bit more. And then I tried to minimize me saying those filler words. One word that I realized that a lot of people honestly say in their broadcasts is right now or now. And when you're doing a live broadcast, it's kind of known that a certain play is happening right now.
It's redundant.
Exactly. So, for example, if somebody has the ball, like let's say Miles Powell has the ball on the left wing, you would say Powell has the ball on the left wing instead of now Powell has the ball on the left wing. Again, it's that little thing that you might not realize when you're on your broadcast, first, second, or third time. But once you continue to listen to your broadcast, and once you continue to really have that drive to improve your broadcast, then you start realizing, okay, this is the stuff that I can take out. And you also realize too, certain passes you might not need to say. Like you said, the cadence, you might need to slow down a little bit more in terms of the play, just to have people get that emotion. Like if Quincy McKnight, for example, is taking the ball up the court slowly, you'll have your cadence be a little bit more slower. Be like, okay, McKnight has the ball, or McKnight has the ball crossing the timeline, something like that. But if it's more of a fast-paced game and they're racing up the floor, that little change in words, just taking the ball up the court or racing up the court, that just adds that feel to your broadcast, and that just adds a little bit more of imagery to the person that's listening to your broadcast. And again, that's something that you might not pick up earlier when you started to broadcast, but as you continue to listen to broadcasts and as you continue to listen to yourself, as well as possibly other professional broadcasts, you realize, okay, these are the kind of things that I could tweak just to make myself sound a little bit better.
Something that you do with WSOU and something that you do through Hall Talk is it's something that's more live, and you have to be on top of everything at all moments. Compare that to something doing pirate news or field shoots and stuff like that. You get multiple takes. Is there one that you prefer more? Is there one that you're more comfortable with through your time doing all these different things?
Honestly, I'll probably say doing everything live is a little bit better for me. Of course, when you do stuff that you could post edit, you have opportunities to do multiple takes and stuff like that. And when you do that, I feel like there's times where you feel like, I really said this one minor thing wrong. Let's redo that whole take just so I can improve that one minor thing. Whereas if you're doing something live, you just kind of have to have a short-term memory with it. If you say one thing wrong, it's like you can't really dwell on that one thing. You just have to continue to keep pushing and you just continue to say what you're saying. And on top of that, too, when you do stuff live, to just talk a little bit about, doing hall talk or doing hall line or something like that, it's easier for you to continue to keep the conversation going when you do something live versus when, for example, with SOU News Brief, formerly Pirate News Desk, when you do that, it's kind of, okay, maybe we need to add to this conversation on a little bit later or something like that. When you do something live, it's like, okay, I feel like this didn't take that much time. Let's continue to kind of drive this conversation a little bit more. And I feel like it's easier to do that with something that's live versus something, that you might do like in a field shoot or like something that you would post edit.
Yeah, for sure. And Chris, I'd actually want your take on that as well, because you've done both things through Pirate TV and through WSOU. Which were you more comfortable with? Which did you like more?
I think I naturally gravitate towards live stuff because when it comes to on-air stuff, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I think, Tommy, you can quite remember that from my 7,000 takes of the Hall Talk opening. So,
Hey, I'd
I
rather
agree
get
with
it done
Wilnir.
right.
Like there's a part of me that I like the fact that since we're taping it, we can do it a couple of times to really, I can nail it. But I also much rather prefer. I'm also a person, I think I handle myself better under pressure, and live performances are a little bit more pressure based rather than taped. So I don't know. I felt like when I was on air for WSOU, if I didn't nail it then, like, then I wasn't meant to be doing it. And I can't ever remember not having a good. I mean, this is me being a little boastful, but like I can't ever remember not having a good broadcast. I've had a number of broadcasts with Wilnir, and my favorite baseball broadcast was with Wilnir. We went out when Seton Hall wasn't playing on campus, and we drove all the way out to Queens to watch Seton Hall play Butler, I think it was. And Wilner and I had the most fun on a broadcast ever, and it was such a good broadcast. Like, we switched on and off between play-by-play and color, and it was just such good chemistry. And that's the thing, is like, that's the thing that really makes doing on-air stuff worthwhile, is if you can do it, because most of the time you're doing it with another person. If you have a good chemistry and a good time with that person, nothing beats it. Honestly, it's just being able to talk sports with your friend while delivering the actual events of what's happening is the best feeling that you can have. And WSOU provides that. PTV gave that to me with Hall Talk. I mean, that was taped, but still, it's live to tape. We didn't stop in between. So I would say live broadcasts I would prefer, because if you don't deliver, then you're not meant to be doing it. And I delivered, and Wilner delivers, and a majority of people between the organizations always deliver.
Listen,
And
Chris, that baseball game was definitely interesting because it was only us two there because we didn't have a beat writer. I forgot what the reason was, and especially with baseball games, you have a lot of dead time. So I just remember a lot of the conversations that we had. I'm pretty sure there was one conversation that we had in regards to like the food or something like that. Like with baseball, it's just like you have so much dead time. Let's just start randomly talking about other things. And when you have that good chemistry, you're not going to be able to talk about those random things, or you might like hinder your personality a little bit to talk about those random things with somebody that you're not comfortable with. But if you're on air with somebody that you're comfortable with, almost anything's a go, especially when it comes to like baseball, when you have those periods where you might need to fill in time.
yeah, even on the back end of all this stuff, the production aspect of everything, I felt it was more fun to be live. Doing Hall Talk live, I'm sure Hall Line was a similar feeling, where you're kind of interacting with the host in a certain way. You're interacting with the crew a certain way, and it's just fast paced. And it's fun because you make it your own no matter what. Even though for Hall Talk, it was a similar show every week, depending who was directing, it was their own show. And I think it was a lot of fun. And you do get to have those fun conversations between each other. And then afterwards, it is coming together and talking about, oh, that was a great show. That was a really good conversation that you started. Chris, when you were hosting, even though they were longer shows, they were really good because it was more conversation based. And then that's something we got to talk about after. We've been talking a lot about Seton Hall's men basketball, and I wanted to know what you think about where their run could have went last year's tournament and where they could go into the future.
I think last year, honestly, for me, I felt like bare minimum they would have been in the Sweet 16. And of course, everybody's going to look at their last two games and be like, oh, yeah, they lost to Villanova and then they got blown out by Creighton. I don't know why I just said it like that. That was weird. But even with those two losses, I still felt like Seton Hall was the best team in the Big East because both Villanova and Creighton needed their best games to beat Seton Hall. I mean, that Villanova game was wire to wire, and I believe Villanova shot above 50% in that game. And then in that Creighton game, Seton Hall was up, I think, late, if I'm not mistaken, either 10 minutes left or 8 minutes left in the second half before Creighton pulled off like a historic run that we haven't seen since, I guess, Seton Hall played Wofford in the NCAA tournament the year prior. So I felt like after those two losses and for Seton Hall, after seeing Creighton just storm the court, cut the nets, and then unveil a banner after, they won that game, I felt like that would have put a fire on the team to make a deep run in the Big East tournament and in the NCAA tournament. So I think last year they definitely could have made the Sweet 16, winning in the round of 64 and in the round of 32. However, for next year, I think it's going to be reliant on if Sandro Mamukellas really comes back. I don't see any reason why he wouldn't come back. I think if you look at his season last year, he missed 10 games due to the wrist injury that he had. And sure, he did put up good numbers, but I think he will only put up better numbers if he does return this coming year without being the main person in charge instead of having to kind of play second fiddle to Miles Powell and even some nights Quincy McKnight. So I think if Mamukellas really does come back, Seton Hall will be a top 3 team, maybe even top 2. Villanova returned way too many people for me to say that Seton Hall will be better than them. And similar to Creighton, I think Creighton, is bringing in a lot of players back that really help them be atop of the Big East and be the 1 seed in the Big East tournament. So I think you'll definitely see Villanova 1, Creighton 2, and Seton Hall 3. But I still see Seton Hall being an NCAA tournament team. I still see them possibly winning 1 game in the NCAA tournament this coming year because you look at Bryce Aiken coming for Seton Hall. He missed a lot of games due to an injury last year, but he is still a good player. You look at Takal Molson, who sat a year. He's going to be a great player for Seton Hall, both on the offensive side, but more on the defensive side. And you look at overall what Seton Hall could do. They had to, as much as well known as Miles Powell is, and as much as we know him as possibly one of the best Seton Hall players ever, they had to feed him the ball that way. They had to make sure Miles Powell got, 15, 20 shots a night, which kind of limited some shots for other players. Now, if for Seton Hall, they're going to be able to really share the ball a little bit more because you don't really have that dynamic scorer. Yes, Mamukellas really can score, but he's not going to try to create his own shots. He's not going to be that prolific scorer that Miles Powell was. So that's going to allow everybody to kind of facilitate the ball a little bit more. If Miles Cale, has the bounce back season, he could be able to get a couple of shots up. If Jared Rhoda continues the trend that he's been on, then he'll be good. Shavar Reynolds off the bench. He was an electric defender and somebody that brought a lot of energy off the bench. So I think this Seton Hall team, a lot of people are saying, they might not be that great this year, but I still think that they are a tournament team, and I still think they could win 1 game in a tournament. Again, pending if Mamukellas really comes back, but I do think that he will come back and Seton Hall will be perfectly fine this coming season.
Do you think that Because personally looking at Seton Hall's team, I think you got a solid 2, you got a solid 3, you even have a solid 4, depending on where Sandro plays if he comes back. I think the biggest part that Seton Hall is going to struggle with is this is kind of the first time where they don't have a really defined 5 this year. That's a standout player, because you had Angel Delgado for 4 years. You had a severely improved Romero Gill last year. This year, are you going to rely that much on Ike, or are you going to try and rely on maybe they brought in a freshman, right? That should be a center position. I mean, Ike is good and he's a shot blocker, but I don't know if he'll be able to facilitate the way that Romero was able to play down low. I mean, even on the offensive side, I don't think Ike matches up as well as Romero did.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely a huge question, because if you look at the Seton Hall team, they could run a smaller ball and have Mamukelashvili at the 5, Roden at the 4. Then you go possibly Kale, Molson, and Aiken at the 3, 2, and 1 respectively, if I remember Aiken and Molson's positions correctly. But I honestly think that Obiagu is probably going to have a good season. Is he going to have a breakout season that Gill had? No, I don't want to say no outright, but I don't think anybody really saw what Gill was able to improve from the year prior to last year. But I think I have full trust in Grant Billmeyer in the way that he's able to develop the bigs. And honestly, that was kind of the same situation the year prior. They had Romero Gill. And in that year, he was honestly similar to what Obiagu was last year, where he would come in for a couple of stints, get a couple of fouls because he didn't really know how to utilize his size, and then have to sit the bench right back. I think Obiagu is going to, if I was Kevin Willard, I would try to see if Obiagu could start the 5. And I do think, again, with Grant Billmeyer's development of, his front court players, I think Obiagu will be a good 5 position. I think he will get a solid maybe 25, 30 minutes a game. But along the same tokens, it's also a matchup thing. Seton Hall could probably afford to go a couple of games running that smaller lineup and having Mamukelashvili at the 5 and then possibly Roden at the 4. But I do think that Ike Obiagu is going to be somebody who's going to improve on the defensive side. And on the offensive side, too, I think he has a lot of room for improvement. Romero Gill wasn't that great on the offensive side. He was there for pick and rolls mostly. But when he started, you didn't really look for him to get that many numbers on the offensive side. And I think it's going to be the same thing with Obiagu. You're not really going to look at him to get a lot of numbers on the offensive side. But on the defensive side, I think he can improve his game, and I think he is athletic enough to possibly start depending on different matchups that they would play in.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said with development. I think Willard and the coaching staff has done a really good job of developing their players. We've seen Roden really step up. We've seen Romero Gill, like you were saying, step up. Their players have increasingly gotten better with each year. We've seen that with Mamu for sure. He was a good shooter his freshman year. They gave him some corner shots and stuff like that. And now we're seeing him become somewhat of a playmaker and everything. Transitioning into the bigger picture of sports is coming back, and it's really nice to hear everything. UConn is now in the Big East. We have your Ravens doing some great things. Patrick Mahomes just signed the biggest contract in all sports. First, let's get your thoughts on UConn and the Big East. That directly affects the Pirates. What do you think is going to happen with them coming back?
Let me tell you something. The UConn fan base, I think, is probably the funniest fan base that I have ever seen on social media because, like we were talking about before with WSU and trying to kind of evolve the social media. 2 posts that I could really vividly remember is the one post where it was like, oh, reply, or who do you think is going to win the Big East? And it was like reply for Villanova, retweet for Seton Hall, and like for UConn. And once UConn's fan base got a hold of that tweet, they started going in on that tweet. And that was the best tweet that I'm pretty sure that any WSOU platform had, because it had over 100,000 impressions. I think 2.2 thousand likes or something like that. So there was that. And then going back to the jersey swaps, one of the jersey swaps that I did was like, oh, what Big East player would you like to see play for Seton Hall? And it was one of the UConn players that I'm blanking on their name right now, but he should be.
Was it Book Night?
I think, yeah, it was Book Night. And once UConn Twitter got a hold of that, it's like, oh, we don't want to see Book Night in a Seton Hall jersey because we're going to be the best team in the Big East. It's crazy to me because UConn, their fan base, they think that they're going to come into the Big East from a lesser conference, because I still think the Big East is top
from the
two.
American.
Exactly, coming in from the American, and I going into a top 2 conference in the Big East, and they're acting like they're going to sweep everybody and go 20-0 in conference play. But in reality, I think that UConn, at least this first year on the men's side, they're going to be probably middle of the pack, probably finish 5th in the Big East. So that's the one thing that I'm excited about. I'm excited to see that first game when Seton Hall plays UConn on the men's side. For the women's team, you can't knock what, UConn women's means for women's basketball as a whole. I know in my preview article in the standings for UConn women's basketball, I think I had them finishing second, but honestly, that was just me trying to find a way just to shift the tide a little bit. But I do think that UConn's women's basketball, they're still going to be just as good as they were years prior, because sure, they are graduating a lot of players, and they had a lot of players go into the draft, but you have the number 1 recruit in all of women's basketball, and probably one of the best recruits that high school sports have seen over the past couple of years. So I think in terms of what it means for Seton Hall, it's going to be, on the men's side, I'm going to be extremely interested to see what happens that first game when Seton Hall has to go out to UConn, and I hope that that's the first game. I hope that that's the first game instead of UConn coming into the Prudential first on the men's side. And on the women's side, I think it's going to be great competition for Seton Hall, because they did play UConn this past season, and they were able to at least keep it competitive in the first half before UConn took over in the second half. So it's going to be interesting for Seton Hall in terms of the entire Big East. If UConn could actually be that good of a team that their fan base thinks they are, then that's just only going to bolster the resume for the Big East and allow people to really understand that the Big East is top 2 in all of college basketball in terms of the conference from top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean, UConn, working at SNY, we've covered a lot of UConn, both men and women's basketball, and James Bouknight is no joke. I mean, the dude he has really good potential to win Player of the Year out of Big East. I mean, and I 100% agree with you, UConn. Well, I don't think we'll even crack 5. I'll think they'll be 5 in the Big East, because they weren't even the best team in the American. Houston had that down pat. So they granted, they're doing a lot less traveling. They're going to be traveling more out west than they were out down south. They played teams like UCF and USF and Tulane and stuff like that. So their travel will be a little bit more local, but I don't know how they'll even compete, or I don't know how they expect to sweep a team like Butler this year. There's no way. James Bouknight will be the absolute standout for their team, but there's no way that they will sweep Seton Hall or sweep Creighton, or even maybe win a game against Villanova. I don't know. I love UConn Twitter. They are just so full of themselves, and they are just so unforgiving when it comes to the rest of the Big East.
Because the thing that's funny, too, is, they looked at those 2 tweets, right, and they were like, oh, yeah, these tweets were negative, when it was just, a random thing. But then we put out an article that said the history of, UConn and their history with the Big East, and that one didn't catch UConn's Twitter. So, they just find any little fuel to fill their agenda. Exactly. And then just start going in on that. But when we start actually giving them, something positive, they're like, oh, I haven't seen it. I don't know what you're talking about. So
I have no eyes. I cannot see.
With that, we'll transition into, I mentioned the Ravens. I know you're a big Ravens fan. Lamar Jackson coming off of MVP year. Where do you think they're going to go into this next football season? I know football, things are kind of up in the air with everything that's going on with the pandemic, but it seems like they're going to start relatively on time and get to play together. Where do you think the Ravens are going to end up?
Do you want me to be optimistic or realistic?
Both.
Because realistically, I think the Ravens will probably make it to the AFC Championship, maybe the round before that, before they lose, just because, I've me being a Ravens fan, I've saw over the past 2 years, when they played against the Chargers 2 years ago and lost that game, but tried to come back in the fourth quarter, and what Lamar Jackson was able to do in the fourth quarter of that game. And then you have the Titans game where it seems like the Ravens will be a better matchup on paper, but then the Titans and Derrick Henry just ran all over the defense. And also credit to the Titans defense being able to shut down the Ravens offense a little bit in that game. So realistically, I mean, you look at the Ravens and the players that they were able to bring in both in the draft and in the offseason through pickups and stuff like that, and being able to retain most of their offense, I do think that they will be a pretty good team, but they're also going to have the target on their backs too. It's going to be a question of how are the Ravens going to be able to act with the target on their backs, because over the past couple of years, they weren't really, the Hunties in the NFL or even in the division. But now, you have Lamar Jackson winning unanimous MVP. You have the defense that was a top 3 defense. I want to say probably the best defense in the NFL. You have their rushing attack, which was a historic rushing attack. So everybody's going to look at the Ravens and trying to just, circle that date on their calendars. But I do think realistically that they'll make it to the AFC Championship or the divisional round. Optimistic, I do think that they can make it to the Super Bowl because, again, offensively, you're retaining a lot of pieces. Lamar Jackson has another year under his belt. With last year being his first full year as a starter, the year prior you only played, I think, 6 games in a regular season and then that playoff game. So now you're interested to see what he's going to be able to do with another full year under his belt and trying to really probably get a little bit more on the throwing side of things. You have Marquise Brown coming off of an injury, and he's been able to rehabilitate that ankle injury that he had. And try to, and then recover from that. So I'm interested to see, how he bounces back from last season, because he showed flashes of him being a real good receiver last season. But again, that ankle injury really hindered him. And then on the defensive side, you have Calais Campbell, who is a great defensive tackle. And he should fit perfectly fine with the Ravens defense. You have Patrick Queen coming in the draft from LSU. And they even said that he makes a perfect fit for the Ravens, being able to play sideline to sideline, even though he's undersized, being able to get his hat to the ball and playing with that aggression. And then you have that secondary from the Ravens. That was a great secondary last year to be able to bounce back for another year. So I'm optimistic. I think the Ravens can make it to the Super Bowl because I think the Ravens are possibly – all around one of the best teams on offensive side, the defensive side, and the special team side, which goes without saying, having one of the best kickers in NFL history in Justin Tucker. The Ravens are one of the best teams overall, but there's still just that part of me that wants to be realistic and understand what we've seen in the playoffs over the past 2 years and understanding that could well happen again this year.
I think this year is really the definitive year for Lamar Jackson. He's coming off of the MVP, and the year prior, like you brought up, he lost in that first round to the Chargers. I think this year is where you're really going to see what kind of a player Lamar Jackson is. You're going to see him in the regular season. You're going to see how he, has adjusted to reading defenses. He's already an accurate passer. I think if he just gets a little a little bit more of arm strength to make really deep passes so that him and Hollywood Brown could just connect on any kind of pass at any point of the field. I think that's where the only thing you need to worry about. You still have Mark Ingram in the backfield, I believe. So overall, they're easily one of the strongest teams in the AFC, without a doubt the strongest team in the AFC North. I still don't believe in Cleveland Browns or Baker Mayfield. I will be very interested to see how the Steelers do with Big Ben coming back, if that dude even makes it 2 weeks. And the Bengals are a question mark. So, I think it's without a doubt going to be the Ravens owning that division. And the rest of the AFC, I mean, you obviously have the Chiefs, but everybody knows that. The only other major question mark of the AFC is the Patriots and the Chargers. The Patriots now, Cam Newton, that's your biggest question mark in the AFC.
Yeah, for sure.
But
And
other than that,
even that with like the Patriots, like sure you have Cam Newton, but offensively they're not that strong. I don't think. Honestly, even with the AFC North, you did say like this would be a question mark with the Steelers, but the Steelers were just, I think, a game and a half or a game away from getting that sixth slot to go into the playoffs. And it was a huge question on their offense. I think the Steelers defensively, they're going to be a good team. Minka Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt, you have those two players. They're going to be a great team defensively, but like you said, it'll be a huge question on what the Steelers are able to do offensively. The Browns, I don't really have faith in the Browns either. And, no knock to the players. I think it's just, their coaching staff. I don't know what it is about the Browns, but I don't know if it's them just wearing the uniforms, the historic nature of the Browns or whatever it is, but they just cannot.
zone.
They just cannot find a way to really come together as a team. I think talent-wise, they could be a good team, but they're just unable to get it. And then the Bengals, I think they're still a couple of years away from really doing anything. Of course, Joe Burrow going to the Bengals is going to make, I would say, a difference, but they're still a couple of years and a couple of pieces away from really making a threat to the top of the AFC North.
Do you think Lamar Jackson, with how he's been playing the past year and a half, he's been lights out? Do you think that now that there's film on him, people have had a whole offseason to study him, do you think he's going to put up similar numbers, or do you think that teams will find a way to stop him, or do you think he'll even have even more growth going into this next season?
I think rushing-wise, he's probably going to take a hit on the rushing side because teams are going to figure out how to at least try to contain him. But I think Lamar Jackson understands that, and I think you're going to see an uptick in the way that he's able to throw the ball and the way he's able to get the passes off. The Ravens are returning two of their tight ends, two out of the three tight ends that they had the years prior. And then, of course, you have Boykin coming back as a receiver. Like I said, Marquise Brown as a receiver. One more receiver, Willie Snead, as well. They're not the best receiving core that you would want in the NFC. Or not the NFC, the NFL, excuse me. But they are still solid receivers where you have the speed in Marquise Brown. You have kind of a possession-ish receiver in Willie Snead. So I think you're going to see an uptick in the way Lamar Jackson is able to pass the ball. But I do think that you're going to see a little bit of a hit in the way that he's able to run the ball. But, even with teams dialing up defenses for Lamar Jackson, he's still going to get his numbers because he's that electric and that elusive. But I think teams are going to find a way to at least try to limit that.
Yeah, for sure. And going from one MVP quarterback to the next, Patrick Mahomes recently signed a $503 million contract for a 10-year extension, $477 million of that guaranteed through mechanisms. With everything happening, it's very incentive-based pay. So if he goes to the Super Bowl, if he wins the Super Bowl, if he gets an MVP, if he shows the greatness that we know he can be, he'll get paid more throughout the years. What do you guys think about this contract?
I think in terms for Kansas City, I think that this makes sense for the Chiefs. That Patrick Mahomes is honestly the face of the NFL right now. You saw what he was able to do with that video to get Roger Goodell to kind of apologize for what the NFL has been doing in terms of like Black Lives Matter and stuff like that. And it also came out that like Roger Goodell, once he saw Patrick Mahomes on that video, he knew he had to take step up with that. So understanding that Patrick Mahomes is the face of the NFL and what he's able to do, I think Kansas City had to take full advantage of it, because now before Patrick Mahomes, nobody really knew Kansas City as a top tier team, and nobody really knew Kansas City as kind of like, the face of the NFL. But now with the Patriots kind of, winding down a little bit, and now you have Patrick Mahomes, the way that he's able to play and the performances that he's able to put up, the comeback that he had in the playoffs, going from down 24-0 and able to win that game against the Texans. The Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes are now starting to be, atop of the NFL. And for the Chiefs, you look at Patrick Mahomes, he's only, I believe, 25 or 24 or something around that range. You want to be able to lock him in long term because you know what he could do. So for the Chiefs to lock him down for a 10-year extension does make sense. But the actual money side of it, I still can't wrap my head around that, because for the longest time now, you knew that like baseball was the way for you to make those long-term big contracts. And you had, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Mike Trout that signed the 12-year deal for 400 and something around that, right?
It was a trio of deals that happened within the same amount of time. Like Mike Trout, Bryce Harper, and Manny Machado all signed basically deals to the end of their career. I know Bryce Harper and Mike Trout are the ones that stick out the most, but they made, I want to say Bryce Harper was like 12 years for almost $400 million. I might be wrong.
Yeah, I don't remember which player it was, but I think it was like a 12-year, like $430 million contract, which was like the biggest contract before Patrick Mahomes. So again, like people knew that like baseball was the way for you to get this money. And they knew like the NFL and playing football, you have a lot of risk with it, and not a lot of the money is guaranteed. But now you have Patrick Mahomes signing this deal where he's getting all this guaranteed money, even getting like injury guaranteed money, and signing long term. So now it's going to shift the tide of what are baseball players going to ask for now, but what are also NFL players going to ask for now? Because, we talked about Lamar Jackson. He's going to have to get an extension soon. You have Deshaun Watson is going to have to get an extension soon. Those two players off the top of my head. And, those are the two players that really are usually compared by the media to Patrick Mahomes. So they're going to try to ask for comparable money around that range. And then, of course, on the MLB side, you're going to have a lot of players that, their contracts are going to start ending relatively soon. And they're going to want baseball to be that avenue where they could get a lot of money once again. So it's going to be interesting to see over the next, year or 2 years what these players are going to start asking for in terms of contracts and in terms of guaranteed money.
I think the biggest thing right now that's going to determine all of that is how the MLB handles this year and the next year once that CBA deal ends, because baseball is not in a good spot. Players aren't very happy with the league, and owners aren't happy with the league. So, if you have owners and players not being happy with each other or with the league, you're not going to get these big insurmountable deals. It's like, it's good for the people like Mike Trout and Bryce Harper and Manny Machado, those star players that already signed their deals for however long they are, because I personally doubt that you're going to see that many blockbuster deals after this, especially now when you're coming into a time where familiarity between players is becoming more common. You have players who are almost like the NBA mentality, where players are not looking to be franchise players. They're looking to bring championships, and whatever makes that most accessible is frankly what happens. That's why Bryce Harper and Manny Machado went around. One, it was for money, but two, it was also to go where they could win. Manny Machado was on the Orioles. You're not winning there. It makes the Bryce Harper deal even funnier, because he left the team and then they won a World Series. But I don't know. I think the NFL and that deal is crazy. Good for Patrick Mahomes. I still don't understand how he made that. Like, I don't know how they locked down an aggressive fast quarterback that likes to take hits like Patrick Mahomes down injury guaranteed money with no trade clause for 10 years. Like, how the hell does KC even have that kind of money? It's not a big market team. You're playing in Kansas City, Missouri. What are you talking about? Like, they've been the face of the AFC West now for a while because of, Alex Smith and now Patrick Mahomes. But, like, that's a deal you would expect out of New York or Chicago or Dallas. Meanwhile, Dallas is arguing constantly with Dak Prescott, the dude who doesn't deserve that kind of money, but he thinks he should be paid like Patrick Mahomes. I don't know. I think it's a good thing for the NFL. It's a good thing for players, I would say. Not for the league, but for players. Because, one, Patrick Mahomes is getting paid if he gets hurt. He's getting paid if he wants to go somewhere else, and he's getting paid if he plays well. So that's all incentive-based. I think that's what the league should do. Incentive-based should be the primary way to pay your players. It's how you get players to perform. It's how you get players to stick around. You want to incentivize your player to perform, not to just play.
Yeah, and with incentives, you get better play out of those players. One last thing before we go. We've been talking about media. We've been talking about sports. And I feel like a good question to tie this all up is, where does your passion come from for both of these mediums? It's obvious through your hard work that you love the media side of everything. And we've been talking about sports. We've been talking about your role as sports director at WSOU. Where does that passion come from, and where do you think it will lead you in the future?
Well, I mean, to kind of start off, in elementary school, I had a lot of friends just because of sports and being able to have that connection to sports, because sports is, a different bread and butter where it doesn't really matter where you're from. It doesn't really matter your background. Everybody's really connected through either a sport or a team or something like that. So, started off there, and through elementary school, through middle school, I started watching a lot of like ESPN. I used to wake up in the morning while I was getting ready, watch Sports Center, and then go throughout my day through school. Then once high school came around, started playing football, and really started getting an understanding, more of an understanding of sports and more of a love for sports. But so that's, I guess, in a nutshell, where my passion from sports came along. And for sports media, for me to actually be in sports media, that didn't really come along until, I would say, sophomore year of college, when I started covering a lot of games. And there's this span at the beginning of the season where I did, I think, like 7 or 8, games in a row. And then after that span, I realized, like, oh, I never really got tired or never really got sick of doing this. It was fun each and every day. Yes, it was a lot of work, but I never got exhausted or never was like, dang, I need to do all this work. It was like, oh yeah, I'm doing all this work to have fun with it. So, that's when I really started knowing, like, maybe sports media is the avenue that I need to fall under. And they always say, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. So it seemed like sports media would be that path where, I really wouldn't have to work a day in my life, where it's just like, I'm having fun doing what I'm doing. And, oh yeah, I'm making money off of it too. So, that's where that passion came along, and that understanding of, okay, this is where I could fall under. In terms of where it's going to take me, honestly, I genuinely don't know, because as of right now, I'm still open to anything. And I think my time at WSOU, PSN, PTV, it kind of shows that, okay, these are my skills, but I have multiple skills. It's not only just on-air broadcast. It's Photoshop, it's production work, it's, field work, video editing, stuff like that. So just being able to kind of perfect my skills for each of those avenues. And then once that one, position opens, or once that one opportunity hits, being able to go into that opportunity and then, showing those people in that company or in that workplace, like, oh yeah, I know you hired me for X, but I could also do Y, Z, and A. So as of right now, that's kind of where my life has been, just being able to be open to doing things, and just being able to learn how to do things. It's how I got to Seton Hall. It's how I got to WSOU. And that path has just kind of led that way. You know, God has taken me on that path. So I'm hoping that he continues to take me on the path of, you know, this is the company that you need to be in, or this is the, you know, the position that you need to be in, or this is what you really need to do. So again, right now at Seton Hall, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm prepared for whichever avenue that I have to take, because that's kind of what, you know, elementary school, middle school, high school has been. It was, okay, preparing me now, once I go into Seton Hall, these are the avenues that I need to take to be successful. So now at Seton Hall, it's, okay, these are avenues that I need to learn, and take to be successful when I graduate and go into the professional field. So, you know, I don't know where any of this is going to go, but I know that whenever an opportunity knocks at the door, you know, I'm not going to just keep the door shut. I'm going to open it up and try to see where it leads me to.
Well, that's amazing to hear. There's no doubt in my mind that you're going to do great things in the future. Hearing your passion, seeing your hard work throughout the years, there's only up to go from here. And there's no doubt that you're going to take those opportunities and bring them to the next level. Wilnir, it was amazing to catch up with you. I really appreciate you coming on for this week. And thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.